Treaty of Waitangi in 1840. There are two language versions. While interpretations of Te Tiriti have differed over time, the most defensible, this is where we get into questions about objectivity, the most defensible historically and textually is that parties agreed that the Crown would exercise authority over incoming settlers and Māori over our own peoples.
Well, I know the treaty very, very, very well, although I must admit I don't speak Māori, but I also know about the letters patent that came from Queen Victoria, I think several months after the treaty, and that was the founding document of New Zealand. And also I go through the treaty wording in every way, trying to find where the partnership comes in. Because this is a queen, and she's got an empire. Why would she suddenly take a small country at the bottom of the world and agree to have a partnership with the people that are living there?
Okay.
Could she have?
At the same time, there's a growing awareness among all New Zealanders of the fragile foundations underpinning New Zealand's constitution. In particular, the illegitimate means by which sovereignty is asserted over Aotearoa and the ongoing effects of colonisation. These dynamics occur, of course, in the wider global context of the global movement to realise Indigenous peoples' self-determination. And I would add to this the devastating and ongoing impact of colonisation reflected in our so-called loss of land, as if it was something capable of being accidentally dropped or left behind, rather than confiscated or otherwise illegally acquired. I also point to the inequity of our health education outcomes and the incarceration of our peoples and the abuse of children in state care. The potential to create a truly multicultural constitution inspired by equality and based on an understanding that people should be regulated by systems that are culturally meaningful to us. To create a constitution that reflects and integrates and merges multiple traditions and priorities rather than only one. To design a constitution capable of enabling all, including Māori, to thrive economically, socially and so on.
The signs say it all, don't they? Because there's already been a Constitutional Advisory Panel review in 2013, and that's what the result was.
The truth is, of course, that we're all guilty of participating in incrementalism. And how could it possibly be otherwise? Like anyone trapped in an abusive relationship, we are forced to play along with the rules set by the abuser simply to survive. One of the most soul-destroying things about colonisation is the way it makes all of us complicit in its maintenance, one way or another. By the very act of continuing to work within the constraints imposed on us by Kāwanatanga, we legitimate a set of constitutional arrangements that are in direct breach of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. We must do all we can to normalise the concept of constitutional transformation, so that by the time our mokopuna appears, it won't be a question of if or why, but merely of when and how.
What we're saying here is, well, we don't mind an elected democracy, we don't like appointed democracy.
Yeah. But the treaty does not mention a partnership.
And as previous speakers have said, we've been having constitutional korero here in these islands of Aotearoa for a millennium. Unlike Whatarangi, we've started to lose the ability to think about the Indigenous on its own terms, as it configures and reconfigures itself, as it expresses its own agency. Blending whenua, blending kinship, is the way you constitute in my culture.
Undemocratic about what's happening here is they're planning a constitution that would give one portion of our population, a smallish portion, advantages over all the others, including the Chinese and the Indians and the Eastern Europeans and the Middle Easterns and the Dutch and the South Africans. All those people are frightened.
Yeah, I started out talking about the legitimacy of the declaration, and I know there is not 100% agreement among Indigenous peoples about that issue, but I think it is fair to say, and I appreciate, I've engaged in Vicky's views and the others, views on this, but I do think it is fair to say that part of that legitimacy does derive from the fact that the Declaration was the result of ongoing discussion between states, United Nations, and indigenous peoples over several decades. And there was something approaching a negotiation, if not really a negotiation, leading to the adoption of the Declaration. And I think it's absolutely the case that the Declaration would not have been adopted in the form it was adopted in had it not been for indigenous people's advocacy.
Each article there is a response to a problem that was brought before the experts, no? And so, so we should not, at least personally, I don't like to undermine, the importance of the UN Declaration, even if it's not implemented as we would like it to be, because it does. It is a record of the historical struggles of indigenous people, and we honor all of those who have spent time to develop to have the Declaration adopted.
The first drafts of the UN Declaration were indigenous written. They were written in 1977 by two organizations that were both international in reach, the International Indian Treaty Council and the World Council on Indigenous Peoples. And those drafts in the late 1970s were entirely indigenous-led, indigenous-driven, community-based, grounded in treaties, in our culture, our laws. My research has taken a look at those early drafts and compared them to what we have before us today, and there's an 80% correlation.
The kind of advantage or the carrot is that sovereignty is on the table. Yeah. It's fundamentally about, or at one level fundamentally about recognition of statehood and sovereignty, and that's not something that is really on the table here. And then just on that sort of tension between, are you kind of recognising or reinforcing the legitimacy of the state by going to a forum that recognises the state? That tension is just as present in our conversation today with constitutional reform, that in some form or other, I think, accepts that there is a state entity here. I mean, what many of us are seeking is equality in jurisdiction, something more like Te Tiriti or Waitangi, than complete rejection of the state here.
In fact, that is what we have been fighting for, that we will be allowed to continue our way of life, our own cosmovision, our philosophies, our worldviews, which have been undermined and destroyed in some cases in many countries. And that is what indigenous peoples have been asserting since we started to fight for our rights in our own countries as well as at the international level.
I think one of the things that we've seen be extremely effective is when local exercises of self-determination, say by an indigenous nation exercising self-determination and governing authority on its lands, and the results of that end up being very good, not only for that nation, but for the nation's neighbors. And we know that happens, right? We know that when there's an exercise of self-determination that, for instance, leads to cleaner water, or cleaner air, or a more healthy ecosystem, or better healthcare outcomes for everyone. We've even got evidence of, for instance, where community development financial institutions that are native operated, that actually only lend, for instance, indigenous people, end up raising the economy for everyone. So when those kinds of spillover effects happen, one of the most important things that allies can do is to talk about it, is to say, the indigenous nation that's next door to us, or that I live in the midst of, or that has been part of my experience, that their sovereignty and their self-determination is not only good for them, it's good for all of us.